In the icy void of Arctic Lapland, the Korpela movement erupted into an unholy storm of ecstasy and depravity. What began as a desperate call for salvation aboard a celestial Crystal Ark descended into a frozen hellscape of frenzied exorcisms, naked purification rituals, and drunken orgies, where leaders claimed divine right to exploit and debase, and the faithful abandoned all decency in the name of God. Fueled by apocalyptic hysteria and unrestrained indulgence, this doomsday cult became a grotesque spectacle of fate spiraling into madness, blurring the line between the sacred and the profane. Hey allihopa! Hi everyone! Dragunilla here! I may or may not have spent my entire childhood in Kiruna and Karesuando where this dark saga plays out, so I'd say my expertise on today's topic is pretty solid. I hope you'll find this deep dive into this crazy cult very few people have ever heard of both interesting and educational. But keep in mind that this video contains dark topics like child sexual exploitation and alcoholism, so viewer discretion is advised. Let's go! The Korpela Movement, also known as the Siikavaara sect, emerged in the harsh Arctic wilderness of Kiruna and the nearby village of Karesuando, located in northernmost Sweden near the Finnish border. This isolated region, perched above the Arctic Circle, endures some of the world's most extreme conditions. Winter temperatures can drop below -50 degrees Celsius, and the polar night shrouds the land in darkness for weeks. The only things that light up the sky in winter are the stars and the ethereal northern lights, offering a stark contrast to the dark snowbound tundra, vast as Africa's savannas but blanketed in ice and silence. Cultural and religious context. This unforgiving environment profoundly shaped its inhabitants. The northern Sami people, indigenous to northern Lapland, lived in harmony with nature, guided by animistic beliefs. For example, they revered the auroras as sacred manifestations of departed souls or celestial battles. The Sami warned against mocking the lights or gesturing at them, as doing so was thought to invite misfortune or death, a taboo still observed in parts of Lapland, a region spanning northern Sweden, Finland, Norway and Russia. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Swedish settlers brought Lutheran Christianity to Lapland, replacing Sami sacred sites with churches and interweaving Swedish customs into Sami life. By the 1930s, Kiruna and Karesuando's culture reflected a unique blend of Sami, Swedish, Finnish, Norwegian and to a lesser extent Russian influences.
Karesuando är en märklig plats även ur språkhänseende. Här möts nämligen praktiskt 4 språk. Fru Anna Sireniva till exempel talar både svenska, norska, lapska och finska.
Fostering both diversity and cultural tension. The isolation and relentless climate made having faith essential for survival, offering solace and structure in a precarious existence. It was in this crucible of extremes, cultural intermingling and spiritual longing that the Korpela movement began. Toivo Korpela. The movement's namesake, Toivo Korpela, was a Finnish farmer-turned-preacher from Ähteri near Vaasa, Finland. Korpela, who had begun preaching during his military service, arrived in Kiruna County around 1929 as a traveling missionary. His fiery sermons and apocalyptic warnings, combining Lutheran tradition with personal revelations, resonated deeply with the local communities. In this isolated, hardship-stricken region where poverty, long winters and widespread alcoholism weighed heavily, Korpela's charismatic presence offered hope. Initially affiliated with the Eastern Lestadian movement, a pietistic revivalist branch of Lutheranism, Korpela's path took a contentious turn. Accusations of embezzlement, allegations of communist sympathies, and criticisms of his unorthodox practices, such as traveling to preach alone rather than with a partner as Lestadian rules required, led to his estrangement from the movement. By the early 1930s, Korpela had distanced himself from Lestadianism entirely. The rise of the Korpela movement. Between 1933 and 1934, while Korpela returned to his home in Finland, Sigurd Siikavaara, a prominent follower, emerged as a leading prophet and visionary. Upon his return in 1934, Korpela was surprised to see how his teachings had begun to evolve into an unorthodox and chaotic theology. The sect, now under Siikavaara's leadership, emphasized fervor over discipline. Very likely due to this, Korpela abandoned his followers entirely in 1935. Rather than dissolving, the movement morphed into something more ecstatic and bizarre under the dual leadership of Sigurd Siikavaara and Artur Niemi, both of whom claimed divine visions and prophetic authority. At the heart of this new iteration of the Korpela movement was a fervent belief in the imminent second coming of Christ, combined with metaphysical elements that blur the boundaries between faith and pure fantasy. Central to their teaching was the concept of a Crystal Ark, a divine Zeppelin-like vessel that would transport either 664 or 666 true believers, depending on the calculation method, to Palestine ahead of Judgment Day. The Doomsday Prophecy. The Crystal Ark was envisioned as a small heavenly vessel, described as 10 cubits, 1 cubit is about 50 centimeters or 19 inches wide and 20 cubits long, a size that would require its supposed 666 passengers to shrink significantly to fit. According to the prophecy, the Ark would descend on Lake Lusajärvi near Kiruna on March 16, 1935 at precisely 6 a.m. in the morning. Once in Palestine, the chosen believers would sing the song of Moses, the Lamb and Jesus, and over the next 100 days, gather 144,000 people from the 12 tribes of Israel to join them. The apocalypse, as foretold, would bring destruction to Scandinavia, sparing only the 666 faithful, who would live in the New Jerusalem for a decade before paradise replaced Earth, save for pockets of eternal torment in Gehenna. The new version of the movement's obsession with this prophecy reached a fever pitch, with members selling off their earthly belongings and gathering in anticipation of the Ark's arrival. The Crystal Ark's arrival and public attention. As the set date for the Crystal Ark's arrival approached, excitement peaked. In March of 1935, Norrskensflamman, a communist newspaper, published the first article about the Korpela movement, reporting that followers were indeed selling off their possessions in preparation for their divine journey. This drew the attention of national media, with newspapers in both Sweden and Finland covering the sect's activities extensively. Even Aftonbladet, one of Sweden's major newspapers, sent a reporter to Kiruna to document the growing spectacle. Curious onlookers gathered outside the prayer halls of the Korpela movement, sometimes numbering in the hundreds or thousands. Reports described a bizarre mix of fervent worship and public ritual. Members sang apocalyptic hymns called Moses Psalms or Songs of Hate, meant to drive away evil spirits and darkness. These could be sung solemnly or shouted in a frenzied manner. A typical Moses psalm sounded like this.
Paapelin porto helvetin, syvään helvetin, saatana perkele.
Which translated from Finnish means the whore of Babylon to hell, deep into hell, Satan, devil. Outsiders were often called whore of Babylon by believers. At their gatherings, members practiced a ritual where a Sami teenage girl would stare into the face of each congregant. If their face appeared blackened to her, they were believed to be cursed by evil spirits. These individuals were then instructed to jump in place while shouting Moses psalms outside of the congregation hall, repeating the process for hours to rid themselves of the curse. Crowds of spectators gathered to watch, intrigued by the chaos. Hell Week and Wild Revelry. A female prophet within the sect, Ebba Strålberg, prophesied that a week of hellish tribulations followed by a week of joy would precede the Ark's arrival. During this so-called Hell Week, Korpela movement gatherings grew wild and uncontrollable. Worship devolved into seemingly unending, crazy parties filled with dancing, shouting and rituals. Neighbors became so alarmed by the behavior that authorities intervened, removing children from the care of sect members. Despite this, the believers insisted that their actions were nothing but sacred religious practices. As March 16, 1935 drew closer, rumors swirled that believers stood on rooftops with packed bags awaiting the Ark's descent. The appointed time of 6 a.m. came and went without incident. But the movement was undeterred, insisting their faith was being tested. Police intervention and changes in doctrine. On April 6, 1935, police arrested several Korpela members outside of the prayer hall as they shouted profanities in public or, as they called it, sang Moses psalms. Sect leaders, including Sigurd Siikavaara and Artur Niemi, were detained and sent to Furunäset Mental Asylum outside of Piteå for 67 days to calm down. This marked a turning point in the sect's activities. Upon their release, Siikavaara and Niemi officially declared that the Crystal Ark was no longer a physical entity. Instead, they explained that it symbolized the word of Jesus and its arrival had already occurred spiritually. This shift marked the beginning of the sect's transformation from an apocalyptic movement to something way more weird. A new phase, the Childlike Era. By mid-1935, the sect replaced its Moses hymns or songs of hate with gentler hymns called the Psalms of the Lamb, focusing on praising God rather than condemning outsiders. Members also began adopting childlike behavior, believing innocence was the key to reaching heaven. They pretended to drive each other around with imaginary reins, tied reindeer antlers to their heads, built toy houses and rolled around on the floor in imitation of playful children. The descent into debauchery. By the summer of 1936, the Korpela movement had entered its most infamous phase, marked by unbridled hedonism and increasingly bizarre rituals. Sigurd Siikavaara, now the sole leader following the death of Artur Niemi in 1936, declared himself Christ's representative on earth. He now claimed the power and authority to absolve sect members of all sin, allowing them to indulge in activities previously condemned by their faith, including unrestricted alcohol consumption, sexual freedom, dancing and card games. Siikavaara's reinterpretation of biblical texts further fueled the sect's descent into moral chaos. He claimed that the word eat in the Bible symbolized engaging in sexual activity, providing scriptural justification for promiscuity. Age restrictions for sexual relationships within the sect were henceforth disregarded, with Siikavaara arguing that maturity should be based on physical development and understanding rather than worldly laws. This interpretation, of course, opened the door to widespread exploitation. Bizarre rituals. As the movement continued to devolve, infamous so-called rituals emerged, capturing the attention of both authorities and the public. The combing and brushing ceremonies. During meetings, members were instructed to undress and expose their genitals to one another. A designated woman from the congregation would then comb their pubes with a brush. Following this, participants bent forward while a cup of lukewarm water was poured down their backs. The behind area was then brushed with a soft bread brush and dried with a towel. These rituals, which of course had no clear theological basis, were presented as a form of light-hearted purification. Naked rolling ritual. Another infamous ritual involved men rolling naked over women lying on the floor, purportedly as an act of spiritual purification to cleanse sins and to draw participants closer to God. This practice, like the others, was conducted with little regard for decorum, and rumors suggested that minors were sometimes involved. Meetings turned into weird gatherings where alcohol flowed freely and participants danced and played cards before coupling off for private activities. All of this started to get the authorities very concerned. Exploitation and Scandal. By 1937, Siikavaara openly boasted of having sexual relations with over 30 women and girls within the sect. Many of these encounters occurred during meetings, often with participants heavily intoxicated and in full view of others. The movement's reputation continued to deteriorate as rumors of minors being involved in sexual acts began to spread. In 1938 to 1939, report of the sect's activities, public drunkenness and homebrewing to sexual exploitation resulting in 3 pregnant minors reached a tipping point. Intoxicated during his interrogation, Siikavaara admitted that he had not been sober for a single day over the past 8 years. He was found to suffer from Korsakov's psychosis, a chronic mental disorder caused by alcoholism, as well as signs of brain degeneration. Later that year, Siikavaara and several other men were charged with sexual offenses involving minors. At trial, Siikavaara defended his actions as divinely inspired, but the court deemed him criminally insane and sentenced him to indefinite psychiatric care. He was committed to a mental asylum where he remained until his release in the early 1950s. Siikavaara died in 1965. As leadership collapsed, the remaining members of the movement faced increasing scrutiny. The police questioned over 100 individuals and fined around 50 for acts that offended decency and morality. By 1939, the Korpela movement had disintegrated entirely. Its rapid rise and dramatic decline left a lasting impression on Swedish religious history, serving as a cautionary tale of how spiritual fervor, isolation, and unbridled charisma can lead to bizarre and destructive extremes. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, remember to leave me a like, a comment, and maybe even subscribe. See ya!